Hi, this is Vivian again, with the third in this series of 3 videos based on the book that I wrote, Becoming Your True Self. In this video, we're going to look at healing trauma, what you can do yourself and what you may need help with. So, a starting point is to think about what do we mean by healing trauma. The first thing to understand is healing doesn't mean that the damage never existed. That's an illusion to say that I was not traumatized. If I have been traumatized, it is part of who I am, and it does exist. What it does mean, what healing can mean, is that the damage no longer controls your life. Now, we saw in the previous video how some of the very early traumas that we may have experienced have a long-lasting effect on our ability to fully live our life, and a lot of controlling aspects of ourselves in order not to go near the trauma emotions. So in my view, a good and sensible way to think about healing is that the trauma no longer controls my life. I am able to live without being undermined by the trauma that I have experienced. So the first question is, and I talked about this briefly in the previous video, is who am I? This is a starting question. If you cannot answer this question other than by invoking attributions, which are the things that people tell us about ourselves, external ideas about us that are not necessarily true, or identifications, that is our attempts, because we have suffered a trauma of identity, to find an identity in external roles and qualities of my life. If we cannot answer the question without these two things, then you must consider that you do not really know who you are. And I would like to just remind you that the trauma of identity that we looked at in the last video can destroy and does destroy your sense of who you are. This is why we call it the trauma of identity. It traumatizes our identity and causes us to split. So I think here it's important to look at what exactly an identity is. What do we mean by this word identity? Most of us, when we're asked what identity means, will go to these external ideas. I'm British, I'm female, I'm a mother, or I'm a psychotherapist, whatever these things are. But they're not really who we are. So we have a definition of identity which is as follows. I am the sum total of everything I have experienced since the moment the sperm and the egg came together and created me. That is my identity. So this must include any traumas that I've experienced. So this includes what is pre-birth and post-birth, even though we can't remember it in our cognitive brain. In the deeper parts of our brain and in our body, those experiences are remembered. Whether the information is remembered or forgotten, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and it includes what has been split off due to trauma, what I don't know about myself because I split it off very young. If I deny any of this, then I am split and incomplete. So, healing the splits from trauma is a process. This is a theoretical look at what it involves. It involves the disintegration of the traumatized split structure, which we can see up here on the right, which becomes quite stuck, really, in a way. And this brings the fragmentation and entanglements into full awareness, which then allows for an integration of the splits by bringing the split off aspects into good contact and relationship with each other. So we could say that the theory of the healing of trauma is to provide a situation where these different parts of the self can come into contact and stop avoiding each other. It's quite a technical way of thinking about it, and in the actuality, of course, it often doesn't look quite like that, but in a way this is what we are doing. in the healing of the splits from traumatization. So healing happens by increasing awareness of survival strategies. So if I start to focus on what I do in my everyday life that are the strategies by which I distract myself from the uncomfortable feelings. These are strategies that help me survive in the beginning, but in the current day, I use them as a way of not feeling the trauma feelings, of keeping the trauma unconscious and out of my awareness. By increasing my awareness of these strategies, this in fact strengthens my healthy I. And the stronger my healthy I becomes, this allows for increased safe connection with the unresolved trauma, which can then result in integration through better connection between the different parts. Going back to the slide before, this is what we're after, is integration. But there's a process that we have to go through to get there. And the other thing that's important is to remember that healing trauma is a step-by-step process and it cannot be rushed. And if you look at the drawing, the journey that we go on is not necessarily a straight line. It goes off in loops and comes back on itself, maybe goes off in a certain direction, comes back again. This healing journey, I think, is something deep within us that we know. It's not conscious, but we do know it, and we can trust ourselves to follow it. So the first step one, is to ask yourself the question, are you carrying unresolved trauma? How would you know? So I have put together some questions that you might want to ask yourself that may help you decide if you are carrying unresolved trauma. Now, some of you may already know it. It may be perfectly clear to you, yes, I'm carrying unresolved trauma. For some of you, it may not be so clear. So I thought that some of these questions might be helpful to you. And I would suggest that if you answer yes to any of these questions, then it is possible you are carrying unresolved trauma. So I'm not going to go through these questions here. You can pause the video, or you can download the PDF from my website, or you can buy the book. They're all in the book. So this is a series of questions, and I have some more questions here that go to things that are slightly more serious. So down here we can see, are you addicted to anything like alcohol, cigarettes, eating, drugs, and so on? Do you sometimes feel like a very small child? Do you have, in fact, a formal diagnosis of a psychological disorder? For example, anorexia, bulimia, schizophrenia. Any of these things, in my view, indicate that you are carrying unresolved trauma. All of these are common survival strategies and symptoms of traumatization. And if we see survival strategies in ourselves, then there must be trauma. So this is the first step, to ask yourself the question, to decide for yourself, do I think I am carrying unresolved trauma? Step two is to take this seriously, to take it seriously that you have suffered trauma. And that means taking yourself seriously. And that's not always easy, particularly if your life experience has been of not having been taken seriously by others, specifically your family and parents. Because this means, in a way, that you have not learned what it means to take yourself seriously. And it sounds nuts in a way, but for some people it is really hard to put yourself first and take yourself seriously. And it is because no one did that for you. Your mother did not do that for you, and in which case you are likely to be carrying a trauma of identity. Step three is that taking your trauma seriously involves will and a commitment to yourself. And you have to bear in mind that if you have experienced the very early traumas, what those traumas meant at the time was that you had to give up on your will and commitment to yourself in order to align yourself with your mother's and father's will and wants. So it's not always easy in this first step even to take your trauma seriously and to have the will and commitment to yourself. It's so often so deep in us that I should put others' needs before mine, that it's hard for me to find that will to do something for myself and to put myself first. But to do something about your trauma, it does require that you make this commitment to yourself. Like the little drawing at the bottom, as if you say to a child part of yourself, come on kiddo, let's deal with this together. Make this commitment to yourself. Step 4 is a process of becoming aware of your survival strategies. Remember, your survival strategies are the many ways in which you protect yourself from feelings, specifically the painful feelings of trauma, and keep the traumatized parts out of your consciousness. The more you become aware of these, the more you strengthen your healthy I. Now, one of the things I would really strongly say to you is don't think you have to change anything. Don't think because you see, this is a survival strategy of mine, therefore I should not do it. You will just end up fighting yourself. Just accept that these are indications that you are suffering trauma. Don't try and put pressure on yourself to change anything. Just notice it. Just be an observer of yourself. And know that while you are doing that, you are in fact strengthening your healthy self. To strengthen your healthy self does not mean that you have to fight yourself. That's not helpful. So, step 5. Now, the reality is that even though you can do an awful lot in deciding and becoming more aware of what your survival strategies are, of how you distract yourself from yourself, the reality is that because of your survival strategies, we can only go so far on our own. There comes a point at which your survival strategies will interrupt you. And they're doing that to keep you safe, to keep you from going into really scary territory. So this is the point at which you might want to find a therapist or a facilitator who understands trauma in this way and works with the intention method. And I'm going to go on to describe a bit the intention method so that you understand what that is and what you can do with that. So there are some therapists around. There are more developing as this work gets more known at the moment. Of course, there's not very many, but if you want some help, you can always contact me and I'll do my best to see if I can find a therapist in your country, in your area. Step 6, the intention method. Now, the other big question, the first big question we looked at is, who am I? And in a way, the important point of that question is to realize that I don't know who I am and to then set myself on the path to find out. The second big question, and this is where the intention comes in, is what do I want? And we bear in mind that if we have suffered a trauma of identity and we have had to identify with our mother's wants and give up on my own want, we may not know. Now, wanting for myself is a very healthy thing to do. If I exist, I have wants, I want. And so this is the next important question that we have. What do I want? And the intention method is a way of starting to say, I want something. It's a process taken from the family constellations tradition. Some of you may know of that. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but it is borrowed from them or taken from them. It allows access to your psyche and your unconscious, split off pre-verbal and pre-birth experiences and information. You can literally decide for yourself that you want to know about these things and set an intention accordingly. It offers you the opportunity to explore your psyche in relation to a particular intention. The word intention implies intent to action. It is a dynamic word. It's not a passive word. So it's not a word like to say that what is it that I desire? Desire is much more passive. It doesn't involve my need to act. So I have an intention to act. And in that sense, it's dynamic and it involves all of you. It requires the will to engage with your process. It is and a clearly stated intention in the beginning of the work. So the intention is the starting point of the process of exploration. And it includes a fail-safe mechanism of your survival strategies so that the process does not go further than your current ability to manage. So in whatever your intention is a sentence or a statement that is the starting point of any exploration that you make in the therapeutic setting. And it comes in a way from your healthy self, your healthy intention to heal yourself. It also is moderated, we could say, by your survival self, by the part of you that says, yes, we're going to do this, but we're only going to go so far because it's scary. So any intention that anyone puts up on a board always comes from a combination of these two impulses within us, an impulse to heal, an intention to do something, and part of us that says yes, but only so far. And you can trust that, and there's nothing wrong with that, because it means that it helps to make the process that you go into safe enough. So this is this fail-safe mechanism that we have naturally occurs in your intention. It's important to know some things here. No one can heal anyone else's trauma, and no one is going to come and rescue you. And we looked in the previous video about the victim attitude as a survival strategy. And the victim attitude is an attitude that says, I can't do this myself. Someone else has to come and rescue me. This is not going to happen. This is a hard reality. Even your therapist cannot heal your trauma for you either. The therapist can only hold the space, accompany you on your exploration, and give some assistance in making sense of what happens for you. You are the person who is going to do your own healing. So the intention method starts with an intention which is written on the board in the group room or in the individual session, whichever you have decided to go with. I put an example intention here. I want to be free of panic and depression. This is a clear want. There's a subtext to this intention for this person which says, I'm not free of panic and depression. These are the things that I'm struggling with. So we have already two things here. There's a want to be free of these things, and there's a reality that I'm not at the moment. And this is the starting point for the exploration. So then part of the next step of the process is that each word in the intention on the board is then represented by a group member if we're working in a group, or by a floor marker if we're working in the private individual session. And then we have a little process that we go through where a badge is put on. The person goes and invites people in the group to resonate with each of these words. So one person for the word I, one for the word want, one for the word to, one for the word be, and so on. And then at the start of the process, the group member with their particular badge on is free to move around the room and explore whatever their experience is. Now, there are some assumptions we make in this process. And one of the main assumptions is that the experiences that the representatives have during the process, after they have been given their badge and are part of the process has started, provides information about the intention for the client. Each word or piece of punctuation that may get represented as well provides access to unconscious information as it is relevant to the stated intention. The process then continues until clarity is gained about the intention. So one of the ways in which I think of this, I've said before, if I have an intention, I want to be free of panic and depression, there's a subtext here that says I'm not free of panic and depression. And the idea is that in the process that develops with the representatives, there will become obvious why I have this panic and depression. Where it comes from specifically, of course, we have theory that informs what we might think, but that's not specific. We want specific information that's to do with this particular person. Another way I think of it is that each word, like let's say the word panic, we have, all of us, an accepted consensual idea of what the word panic means. We can look it up in the dictionary, for example. But for each individual person, this word will have a very specific meaning in their unconscious. And so I think that each of these words provides a thread down into our unconscious as to what this word means in this particular intention for this particular person. And this is the kind of information that surfaces through the representatives. It's a bit of an odd process, and it's kind of hard to explain. And like this, it really is something that you have to experience to understand really how it works and how it can be useful to you. So I'm not going to say any more about it at this moment, except I'm going to say something about the advantages of the intention method. It requires that you have an intention. So it requires that the person whose work it is already has this energetic impulse to do something. It's an embodied experience because we're up, we're standing up, we're not sitting down, we're not just talking, we're not just coming from our neocortex, we're coming in a way much more experientially from our body. And that, of course, it's our body is where we hold trauma, not in our intellect. Our body is where we hold the splits, where the tension happens in our body to keep these trauma experiences suppressed. So it really is important that the healing process is an embodied experience. The process provides access to unconscious split-off pre-verbal and pre-birth material, as I have said before. It will show you also your survival strategies and the relationships between the split parts within you. So some of the parts within us may not talk to each other. They may not even want to look at each other. And it shows this. This is important information because until you see this, if you like, non-communication between the parts, you cannot see perhaps what you need to do to make them more able to come into contact. It can show the context of traumatization within the family. So very often it shows from our psyche what the context was that we arrived in. Now, by the context, I mean your parents and their psychological state. Now, their psychological state was in place long before you were even conceived. And their psychological state and their relationship state is the context in which you arrive and you have to manage and deal with as best you can. And that's what often causes the trauma. And this is often shown in the process. It offers the possibility, the process offers the possibility of contact and connection with the split-off parts, as we've seen, and it offers this safety mechanism that keeps the client in charge of the work, which maintains safety for the client. So the important thing about this process is that the client is in charge. You are in charge. Who you talk to, who you listen to, where you go, what sense you make of what comes up. The therapist is there to help, but the therapist is not the authority of you. You are the authority of you. It may not be fully conscious in you, that's fine. You are still the authority, and you are the person who deals with this and makes sense of it. So I'm going to say now a word about contact. Essentially, resolving trauma means coming into better contact with the split-off parts of yourself. In this sense, contact is about feelings. It is likely to be emotional and moving. It also is a moment of clarity of perception, insight, and understanding that changes you. An aha experience, if you like. We see something that we've not seen before, or we experience, in a way, something that we have not experienced before. It also is a relaxation and a release of physical tension. So, as I said during the previous slide, trauma is held in the body and is held in the tension of suppressing the traumatized part, keeping it split off. It's not just a concept, it actually happens in the body. And so often what happens in the process is a relaxation and a release of this physical tension, sometimes which has been held for a very long time in the body, most of our life. And it's a brightening of reality and truth. Part of the process is a process of coming into contact with what's true about you. One of the things I say to my students and my clients often in groups is, of course, you can ask your parents about what happened, what the pregnancy was like, what your birth was like, these kinds of things. But you have to be a little bit careful, because if your parents themselves are traumatized, they will only tell you what they can bear to tell you. They will not tell you anything that takes them closer to their trauma. We could perhaps say that they will answer you from their survival strategies. So you cannot, I don't think, rely necessarily on getting the full truth from your parents. The full truth of you is within you. They can give you some information, maybe it's helpful. But the real truth about you is in you, nowhere else. And remember, you are in charge of your healing. It's your life, and only you can change it. Putting yourself first, in my view, is the most sane thing you can do. You can only truly love someone else if you love yourself. And if we have suffered from these traumas, then we almost do not know how to love ourselves. We don't know really what it means. But if you put yourself first, you can then come to a point where you truly love and include all of yourself. Then you are more able to love others and be in good contact with other people. So that's the end of this third video based on this book, Becoming Your True Self, which has been translated, as you can see, into Dutch, German and Russian. If you have any questions or comments, do please leave them and I'll try and answer them as best I can. And in the meantime, I will be producing other presentations, but not in this series. This is the end of this series related to this book. Bye for now.